Welcome to Handmade History. Welcome to episode 3 of Handmade History Podcast. I'm Alicia.
And I'm Sonia.
And I have been doing a lot of cross-stitch this summer. I inherited a bunch of kits and patterns from our Aunt Corey. And I also just got obsessed with it. And Sonia, you are also a big cross-stitcher.
Yeah. I have been working on, every cross-stitcher, I have 4 projects.
Yes.
But I've been working on, I got a kit of the Paul Revere house, from the Paul Revere house in the North
Amazing.
End. So I've been working on that. And it was a lot of large blocks of color.
Uh-huh.
But then there's some glass, stained glass windows I got to do. So
ooh, sounds very cool.
Yeah.
Sounds complicated.
It's mostly just regular cross stitching. There's not really that many fancy stitches, although there are a few partial stitches.
Sure.
Quarter stitches.
Oh, gross. Anyway, so we were talking about ideas for our next episode, and we thought, why not do history of cross stitch? But that is an enormous topic. So I then thought, why don't we narrow it down to history of cross stitch as we do it today in 2024? Because cross stitch is very specific. Like you were just saying, Sonia, you just do the same. Usually you just do the same kind of stitch, one stitch, a cross stitch. And the actual things that you use for cross stitch are very hyper specific, I feel compared to other crafts. Would you agree?
Yeah. There's a lot, even with an embroidery, you can get specific cross stitch stuff.
Yeah. It's a subset of embroidery that it just has these tools and materials that you always use. So if you do cross stitch, you buy a kit or a pattern and you always get the same things. So you get a pattern with a chart on it, and the chart always looks the exact same way. It's basically tiny graph paper, and then the graph paper is filled in with all different symbols, and each symbol corresponds to a different color. And do you think that the symbols are crazy? I think that the symbols are so bizarre.
They can get really, if you're doing something with a lot of colors, there's only so many symbols. So then you start getting into filled in heart versus empty heart versus dashed line heart. You get really ways where it's clearly a different symbol, but it's easy enough to misread them if you're looking at a tiny pattern.
Yeah. So these patterns all look exactly, they have the same format. And then you also get a piece of AIDA cloth, and you can say it AIDA or AIDA, like the opera. There'll be more on that later. How do you say it, Sonia?
I said AIDA.
AIDA. Oof. That wasn't even on my list. But I suppose you could say that.
Ahead, so I know the origin, which I didn't know the origin of.
Oh, man. Get psyched.
I just thought that was a name.
Well, it is, but it's a kind of an interesting name.
Yeah.
So this kind of fabric, though, it's even weave fabric. So it has the same number of threads going across as it does going up and down. And the weave is not very tight. It's very regular. So that there are dots in between. There are holes in between that you can poke your needle in. And so you don't have to use a sharp needle. You use a blunt needle. So you get the chart, the cloth, and then you always get different colors of DMC floss. And then you have an embroidery hoop and needle.
So the embroidery hoop and needle we are going to leave for another day because those are thousands of years old. But the pattern, AIDA cloth, and DMC floss, those are all fairly new. And they are uniform across the board. So, there are different other brands of embroidery floss, but your kit or pattern will always include the numbers of the DMC floss colors that you need to use, even if it comes with other threads.
I'm sure there's some exception out there, but it would, if you were trying to sell your cross stitch pattern and you didn't have one of these things, it would be hard, I think, for you to do that.
And all of the patterns I've seen.
Yeah.
It's in DMC. And they have sometimes other.
Yes. Sometimes there are other ones.
They'll do different comparisons, but it's all.
Yes. I agree. Also, I should mention, you can cross stitch on even weave fabric. Sonia, you do this.
I do.
And so that's the same thing. The same number of threads going up and down also go horizontal, but there's no holes. So I have heard that this means that the squares on the pattern mean that you make the X's across two threads, but I cannot wrap my brain around this.
It's more like there are no, so like in AIDA, there's bunches of thread where there's no hole, right? And like in
Yes.
even weave, it's only gaps. So rather than counting, I go across one bunch of threads, you go across two gaps, kind of. So you're really just counting threads as opposed to counting going across a gap.
That kind of makes sense.
I like it for specific projects. So if you're having a lot of white space in the project, you're not putting any thread on it.
Yeah.
I think even weave is a cleaner look.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot more texture in AIDA cloth.
Yes.
But if you're just doing something that's a lot of blocking, or even just a really involved, really large piece, the AIDA cloth can be.
Yeah. Fair enough. All right. So this is going to be the history of modern cross-stitch patterns, AIDA fabric, and DMC floss. And we're going to start with the fabric because the pattern and floss kind of go together. So
AIDA fabric was created sometime in the late 1800s. Java canvas, which looks very similar but stiffer, appears in a diagram by Isabel Beaton in 1870. And the term AIDA cloth appears in the Encyclopedia of Victorian Needlework by Sophia Frances Ann Caulfield and Blanche C. Saward, which was published in 1882. It also includes other names for this fabric: Connaught, AIDA canvas, toile couvert, fancy oatmeal, and basket cloth.
I love the fancy oatmeal.
Yeah, that's weird. And in this encyclopedia, it's described as a linen cloth. And the name AIDA is significant to this time period because in 1872, the opera AIDA came out and was incredibly popular. So historians think that the name or pronunciation of the cloth might come from this opera.
Yeah, so it's kind of weird, when you see this word, you're like, oh, isn't that the name of an opera? And it might actually be connected to the opera. Isn't that weird?
Weird, yeah.
Super weird.
Because I knew about both of those things.
Yes.
I knew about the opera AIDA.
Yeah.
But I never would have thought
that the cloth that has the same name is actually maybe named after it. There's a company that is still around today that claims to have invented AIDA cloth. The Zweigart Company says that they invented it in 1907. But based on kind of what you just said, Sonia, we know that AIDA cloth existed beforehand. But I have a hypothesis that could clear this up, but it's just a hypothesis. So I will mention that at the end. The story of the Zweigart Company is actually very interesting. So I'm going to kind of set aside whether or not they are actually the true inventors of it and tell the story of this company, because it's possible that this cloth was invented or distributed or popularized by a woman. So I dug up this story on a German local history blog called Cannstatter Frauengeschichten, or Cannstatter Women's Stories. And that is written by Elizabeth Schrappspeck. And she really dug deep into the history of this person. And she found out all of this information from going through the birth, death, and marriage certificates in the area. So she writes this local history blog, and she kind of went down this rabbit hole. So just to set the stage, the Zweigart Company was founded by Paul Zweigart and Julia Sawicki. Paul was a merchant whose father was a shoemaker, and they took over a cotton manufacturer in Stuttgart called Schmidt and Fitzenmeyer in 1877, and it made jacquard fabrics. And jacquard fabrics are interesting. They have designs woven into the fabric itself. And I thought that was not super far from the way AIDA cloth is, because you have to weave it in a special way. So it's almost a natural connection there.
So Paul married Nina Bauer in 1878, and Nina Zweigart is the probable inventor of AIDA fabric at this company. In 1879, Paul and his partner Julius moved the factory in Sindelfingen and began making embroidery fabrics. It's possible they were inspired by Paul's wife, who was born in the U.S. and grew up for part of her life there.
So this was the rabbit hole that this helpful blogger went down. It's all about Mina Zweigart, who was born Mina Bauer. Actually, her full name was Wilhelmina Bauer. So she was born in Germany. Her parents were probably Johannes Bauer, a businessman from Cannstatt, and Marie-Louise Schwartz. And Johannes Bauer was probably from a winemaking family in Cannstatt at the same time. And possibly he wanted to break away from this family tradition, so he emigrated to the United States with his wife and his young son, who was Mina's older brother. And then Wilhelmina, who became Mina, was born September 9th, 1857 in Cincinnati.
Around this time, embroidery, needlepoint, and cross-stitch were growing in popularity in America. In 1851, there was a great exhibition in Hyde Park, which was the World's Fair in Chicago. 6 million people visited the Crystal Palace there. And there was a wing called Berlin Woolwork, Needlework, and Miscellaneous. So we'll talk more about the Berlin Woolwork later because it's very related to the story. But in the 1860s, women's magazines began to popularize it by including patterns. And Berlin Woolwork, incidentally, only uses cross or 10-stitch.
And 10-stitch, I had to actually check. It's just a half cross stitch. It's a one direction stitch.
Oh. I never heard it called that. I always called it a half cross stitch.
I found it, I came across it a bunch of times, so I had to look it up.
Okay.
So this means that cross-stitch's ancestor, Berlin Woolwork, was booming in popularity around the time that Mina was living in America. Then the family actually had another child, Georg Ernst. It looks like George, but you say Georg. Georg Ernst Washington in Germany in 1861, which shows that the family returned to Germany. So possibly they had made their fortune in America and wanted to retire back in Germany. Obviously, they remained fans of America based on their third child's name.
After Mina and Paul got married, Zweigart moved to Sindelfingen. At the time, there were 115 weaving mills in Sindelfingen, and today Zweigart is the only one left. That's it.
Yeah.
In 1881, Julius Sawicki, Paul Zweigart's partner, died, and Paul ran the company. Paul and Mina had one child who died at birth, and in 1902, Paul died of heart attack.
Whew.
And then Mina took over the company when she was 45 years old. And in 1907, the company began manufacturing AIDA cloth. At first, they only sold it in Europe, but in the 1950s and 1960s, they made international sales.
Yeah, and this company is still, they still sell fabric. I have some. There's other companies now that also make the fabric, but definitely it's a popular one. Easily available. So based on kind of this timeline, my thought is that Mina maybe inspired Paul to start making embroidery fabrics at his company fairly early on compared to maybe other factories in Europe. Because she knew about cross-stitch and embroidery from her time in the U.S. And then she either created her own version of AIDA fabric or made a version that the company made. So even though AIDA fabric existed beforehand, this factory definitely popularized it. And I mentioned earlier that I have a hypothesis about how it could have been in this same kind of fabric could have been mentioned in these other books that were earlier. And also, Zweigart could also be the creator of it, since those books said that that AIDA fabric was a linen fabric. And Zweigart began as a cotton manufacturer. Maybe they created a cotton version of AIDA fabric, and so that's their claim to fame. But it's possible I'm splitting hairs. What do you think, Sonia?
Because now it's cotton, right?
I think it's cotton, yeah.
Probably, because linen can be so expensive.
It's stretchy.
Yeah, I mean, it would have to, I guess it could be into hand weave. I guess anybody who would figure out the way to manufacture it would probably be the one to be right, because hand weaving anything is going to take so much longer.
Yeah, maybe they were the first to manufacture it on a factory. Yeah,
because it's right around that time when
or maybe machine manufacture it. Yeah,
because we can figure out it's the first people to machine manufacture lace, right?
Yeah, actually, people did they would have factories, but they would actually send out the work to be done at home in other people's homes. So the factories were not factories were what we think of today. Mm-hmm. So maybe that was their innovation that they machine made it.
It's odd though that it's a recent invention, right?
Yeah,
it's not so long ago. So it's odd that it's not such a murky invention because it seems like it would be pretty clear unless it was just kind of people locally would make it.
Yeah, or if it has a longer history that we can't find. Yeah. So
Eden weave, I think just in general, I don't know what people have brought. Like people did like black work embroidery stuff, like in the like really
15
popular in like the Tudor era and stuff.
in
So
the Tudor era. Yeah.
cool. So I don't know what kind of fabric. I think they'll just be on regular fabric. They're like clothing fabric.
Right. Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. So still partly shrouded in mystery. Okay, but this is a true rabbit hole. All right, so I then started Googling Wilhelmina Bauer and AIDA, AIDA, and I found out that from 1999 to 2009, for the opera AIDA in New York City, there was a costume designer named Wilhelmina Bauer.
Oh, that's fun.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
My head exploded.
That's wild.
I know. Felt like an Easter egg in the video game of the universe.
Yeah. Okay, but we have a decent history of Ada fabric. It was created in the late 1800s. It was perfected and or popularized in 1907 by Zweigart, which at the time was run by Nina Zweigart. So now we're going to talk about patterns. We mentioned Berlin woolwork, and Berlin woolwork is very similar to needlepoint. So you work from a pattern and fill in colors to create images.
It's described as addictive. So I found this great book, and it quotes from a lot of original sources. It's called The Embroiderer's Story. And this poem comes from the History of Needle Making, which was published in 1852. It's about this husband who comes home and finds his wife is just like stitching. So I'm going to read you a part of it. The other day when I went home, no dinner was for me. I asked my wife the reason. She answered, 1, 2, 3. I told her I was hungry and stamped upon the floor. She never even looked at me, but murmured, 1 green more. So she's like counting. She's basically, it sounds a lot like very similar to doing counted cross stitch, where she's like keeping track of which color stitches she's going to do in what order, and also ignoring.
The number of times I have to be like, don't talk to me, I'm counting my stitches.
Yeah. So, yeah, sounds very familiar.
The pattern was different from older embroidery patterns, which were what we think of as freehand embroidery patterns. Those were pictures that you traced onto fabric and then sewed over using different stitches. In contrast, Berlin woolwork patterns had squares, and each square corresponded to a cross or 10 stitch, which we talked about was the half cross stitch. And they were very easy to follow, and floral designs were super popular.
And the very first floral designs were made by Philipson, which was a Berlin print seller in 1804 or 1805. So I thought that was kind of interesting because this person sold prints, this company sold prints, and then they started selling patterns. Also popular were scenes with lots of different colors, lots of details, and, I think the addictive quality comes from the variety of like a really intense lots of different colors pattern. So they kind of work and feel like color by number a little bit, but you get like a very beautiful, nuanced design.
Yeah. And then in the 1860s, women's magazines started distributing patterns, and they include directions in order of the colors of wools that you needed. Directions to order the color. And some shops even made kits that you could order. So very similar to buying a pattern today.
Yeah. And it's also important to keep in mind that women actually had, some women had leisure time in this period. So even though it was difficult work, they could work in factories, they could live in cities and not live and work in the same place like as servants or on farms. So they had time to read magazines and do these sorts of purely decorative crafts.
So now we're going to go for the final piece of the modern cross-stitch puzzle, which is DMC floss. So a few things had to happen in order for DMC to eventually make the Mouline Special, which is what almost every pattern includes today.
So Mouline Special are the kind of DMC colors that you're always ordering. They always say Mouline Special on the label. First, synthetic dyes were created. They were made by William Perkin in 1856. And there were lots and lots of different colors that you could make now, but they were prone to fading.
Second, a process called mercerization was created. This is a process created by John Mercer in 1851, which increases luster, to shine, and allows fibers to absorb more dye. It's a combination of a chemical that is added and tension on the thread. That combination produces the extra shine and lets the thread soak up more dye.
Yeah. And finally, Berlin Woolwork created or popularized the idea that the pattern could tell you some numbers. You could call up a shop and get the exact colors that you wanted. So Berlin Woolwork actually had its own version of DMC floss, the Zephyr wools, which were dyed in lots and lots of colors.
So here's a brief history of DMC and how they inherited this trend for embroidery floss. DMC is a French company. It was started in 1746 by Jean-Henri Dollfus, Jean-Jacques Schmalzer, and Samuel Holchen, who ran a chintz company.
So Samuel's nephew, Daniel Dollfus, eventually took over. His name became Daniel Dollfus Meeg after he married Anne-Marie Meeg, and that's how the company became Dollfus Meeg and Campagne, or DMC.
Jean-Henri Dollfus's sons really created the product we have today. Emile introduced mercerization, which he discovered while studying in Leeds, England. Daniel improved dyeing processes, leading to color fastness. And in 1898, they invented Mouline Special, which is what modern cross-stitchers use today.
And another son, Jean, met with a famous embroiderer whose name was Therese de Dilmont, an Austrian, in 1878 at a Universal exhibition in Paris. And this was another World's Fair. And Therese de Dilmont created an embroidery school near the factory in 1884. And she eventually wrote a popular encyclopedia while she was working at this school, or leading the school. And so this was kind of like a creative collaboration between DMC and a designer.
And that's really not far from what we have today, which is designs in DMC floss.
So that is the story of thread from DMC, patterns from Berlin Woolwork, and AIDA cloth from the Zweigart factory, and murkier beginnings. So I took away a few things from this. The biggest thing that I noticed was that women and their buying power played a big hand in the creation of cross stitch. So their leisure time and kind of like the popularity of these handcrafts, their adoption of it, became an economic force that other people wanted to participate in, right? It like galvanized factories to start making different kinds of cloth. It inspired floss companies to make these kind of like really good, colorful flosses. And so that was all driven by the economic power that women had at this time.
Victorian women also had leisure time to pursue these handcrafts and subscribe to magazines. And they also had to be educated. Like you mentioned, they had to have money to really pursue this craft and buy these magazines.
Yeah. Another interesting takeaway I thought was that the role of the World's Fair in popularizing patterns and techniques. And when you read that stat, 6 million people at the Crystal Palace, at the one in Hyde Park, that just seems like such a huge number to me for like this time period. 6 million people is a lot. But these World's Fairs were kind of the first place that a lot of people could see the very same things at the same time over the course of a year.
Yeah. Yeah, everything started in the late 1800s and have remained virtually unchanged.
Yeah, pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And then after doing all this research, I thought of something which I have come across on social media. I wonder if you have seen it, Sonia. It is like videos for Victorian cross stitch, and they show people stitching on canvas. Or it's like a diagram that shows how the Victorian cross stitch is done. And basically, it's like doing a cross stitch in one movement. Or instead of doing, usually in cross stitch, you go out doing, I suppose it's 10 stitch in like one direction, and then you go back, make it into an X coming on as you work backwards. But in this Victorian cross stitch technique, you just kind of like do the X and then you move over all in like a very fluid motion all at once. So what's that? Have you seen this?
I haven't seen it now.
So look it up. It's interesting. But
Yeah.
I've often seen it done on canvas with like colorful yarn. And I'm wondering if what is called Victorian cross stitch now was actually Berlin wool work.
Oh, yeah.
Just just wondering. So, any other thoughts about cross stitch today?
Um, I think it's interesting because I feel like in the last like 5 years, we've been seeing a resurgence of it, or like the last 10 years, maybe,
Yeah.
where like it was always seen as, even when it wasn't necessarily as like a Victorian, but kind of like an older generation craft. Like I
Yeah.
learned how to do it because like our mom did it and our
Mm-hmm.
grandmother, and our great grandmother would do them. So like, so we have all these like, older, like patterns and stuff that you can
Yeah.
do. But now that all these modern patterns being created and like a lot of young people creating patterns, and like I think people are turning to it as like a very just like kind of relaxing hobby
Yeah.
because it is like by numbers, but there's no paint.
Yeah.
You can't glitter.
No, I was
Yeah.
thinking, yeah, go ahead.
But yeah, I just think it's interesting because it was kind of like when I was doing it as like when I was younger, it was kind of like, well, you were kind of took whatever kit you could find
Hmm.
almost. Like it wasn't the same way as now you can go online and whatever you want to do in cross stitch, you can find a pattern for it.
Totally. I feel like even cross stitch has more variety than even like other crafts in terms of like what you can find. Yeah, I was thinking a lot too about like how addictive and satisfying it is because I did it so much this summer and like you really just I just can't stop. Like it's like so relaxing. You just pick it up and do it. And because you're doing the same stitch every time, you don't have to think very much. Just like pay attention
Yeah.
to the colors and that part is really satisfying.
Yeah. I like it because, yeah, I mean, you can get prints, like patterns that have you can get like fabrics that have the pattern printed directly on it.
Yes.
But I really like the counted cross stitch because it's like there's nothing there. And then it's very satisfying that you create it as you
Yes.
go. Like I like that
I
aspect of it.
I totally agree. I sometimes feel like this is the image I have is that like I look at the pattern and then I'm like sewing. So somehow it's like my brain has projected the pattern onto the fabric.
Yeah. I think because people are sometimes like, oh, like how do you keep track where you are? But you really do. Like once you've done it like a few patterns, you just kind of you like orient yourself within the pattern as you're working on it. And you just kind of you don't have to like mark anything. You just kind of figure out where you are based on everything else. So it's not as like I don't know, it's not like it looks very confusing looking at a pattern right away, but you just kind of learn the symbols eventually. It's great.
Yeah, it's kind of like those like really complicated patterns that everybody's going crazy for with the Berlin wool work. Like it looks like this beautiful painting, but you can just look at the pattern and just match it and fill in the colors. You can do it. Your brain can do it. Pretty amazing.
Mhm.
Cool. Well, thanks for listening. You can email us at handmadehistoryhosts, HOSTS, at gmail.com. We would love to hear from you, especially if you know the history, the actual earlier history of AIDA cloth, AIDA cloth. You can also find us on Instagram at Handmade History Podcast and on TikTok as Handmade History Podcast. Bye.
Bye.
What was that?